Hello, I'm Gene Edwards. B.B. King said Muddy Waters had something no one else had, and I loved, he said, to hear him play. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards loved him so much that they named their band after one of his songs, and the Rolling Stones were born. Muddy Waters was the godfather of the blues. Robert Gordon is the author of several classics about the blues, including It Came from Memphis and The King on the Road, and a new documentary which will air later this year on PBS. The documentary and the book are all about the life and times of Muddy Waters. Let's take a look.
Muddy was playing when I was plowing. A muse, that is. And I call him today the godfather of the blues.
You said you love me, baby. Please call on the phone sometime.
My dad always told Muddy that he was going to preach. Because if you notice, he had a lot of that in his singing.
You said you love me, baby. Please call on the phone sometime.
There's a demon in me, and Muddy, there's a demon in everyone. He's trying to express it to everybody. Say there's a dark beast in us all.
Muddy had something about him that made the songs themselves stand out. But what he was doing at the same time was inventing the rock and roll combo.
You hear my phone?
When Muddy Waters was talking to you, I was patting my feet. When he was talking, it sounded like he was singing all the time.
The most sexy blues man that I've ever encountered is Muddy, without a doubt. He's bad, man. I think about it now and I get kind of trembly.
I know you hear my phone ringing.
He was as much as a family man as he could be. He was a womanizer.
He knew how to play his hand. He played it well.
I pick up my receiver. The pilot said it's another news.
Guys like Muddy Waters, you can't be as great as Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf without having another deeper level that has nothing to do with music. It's based on experiences.
We were unloading our guitars and stuff out of the van and carrying them into the studio, and somebody behind us said, you boys want a hand? We looked around, it was Muddy Waters, and we were like in total shock. I'd asking if he could help us carry the guitars in, and he actually did.
The Stones, the Eric Clapton, the Jeff Becks, and all those people who were selling platinum records, but they came back and say, this is not new music, this is Muddy Waters music.
So when we brought it to America, it was like a new music to the white kids here as well, because they hadn't really heard it or didn't really know about it, and they'd say, where can we get this music? And we'd just down the road there. Just go across the river and it's there, We had to come across the ocean. You just have to go across the river and it's there. And they were all like surprised.
And Robert Gordon is here with us on Conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. What was it that lit your fire? What was it that got you fired up?
First time I heard him play, it was on a record, and I heard the deep sounds coming out of his. It didn't just come from his voice; it came from deeper and
came from somewhere else.
The chest, inside the chest, somewhere in the soul. This sound popped out. I said, "I'm hooked."
Yeah. And you remember the first time you saw him?
One time when I saw him that really stands out was a outdoor dusk performance that it was an all-day show that ran late, and they didn't have lights on the stage, and he came on as dusk was settling, and then dark descended, and the sound just emanated from the stage. It was out of sight.
I love the story that you tell in the book about Alan Lomax. who showed up down there in the Delta, and they tracked him down.
What a crazy story, you know. 1941, Muddy Waters is 28 years old. People are going north. The blues, you know, he's hearing friends of his from the Delta on record, and it's his dream to make a record. And this guy, you know, he gets word one day that the white man's looking for him, and it's a Sunday, he's barefoot. I found all these notes. I went through the Lomax archives and a few other places. And he goes and gets to make a record that day.
But he didn't know that Alan Lomax was there to record him. What do you think?
He thought that the revenuer man was there to bust his still. He totally thought it was a moonshine agent.
Because he was the guy.
Because he was the guy
on that plantation.
On Stovall Plantation. Right there outside of Clarksdale.
Took care of everybody.
And ordinarily, he got the tip-off from the higher-ups on the plantation when the agent was coming, because he was popular. He was a big entertainer in the area, and he was popular among, he was popular among all the people there, so they didn't want him to get in trouble. So they would tip him off, and he thought that he was being traded, that there was something had happened, and he was the pawn in the game, and he was going to get busted.
So he looked in the back of Alan Lomax's car, and what did he see in there?
The way that they were doing field recordings in 1941 was the back seat and trunk of the car had been converted into a recording control room, and so he looks back there and he sees a guitar, and Lomax plays it, and Muddy hears that the guy can play. He says, "Hey, this guy might not be a revenue agent." And actually, the other thing that tipped his mind was Alan Lomax asked for a cup of water and drank out of the same cup that Muddy had sipped from.
Which was unheard of.
Which was unheard of for a white man to do that after a black man. And then after that, they sipped some of the hooch and went on and made their...
and off
they went. A career was born.
And those recordings are classic.
They're great. And it's nice that not only do the recordings of Muddy Waters from 1941 and 42 survive, but also there's interview segments, and you get to hear the dialogue between Muddy and Alan Lomax and his recording partner, John Wark.
In that old shack.
They did it at home. They did in 1940.
Which ended up, was that shack part of the blues?
It traveled.
House of Blues traveled around the country.
That's a funny thing. I talked about that some in the book. The cabin that Muddy Waters was raised in on Stovall Plantation was disassembled. The wood was treated and restored, and the cabin was reassembled and went on something like a world tour. It ended up at the Chicago Blues Fest and the Atlanta Olympics. They put a museum inside it. And I really think it's kind of nice, you know, that someone who might not ever have seen a cotton field shack could actually stand inside one and get a sense of where
how they
music came from.
What they were going through.
It's much more, I think it's more strong to be, if you can see that in its setting, in its proper environment, you know, and I think we're seeing that. There's a lot of blues tourism now, you know, people from all over the world coming down into the Delta and all through the state of Mississippi looking for the source of the feel of the blues.
Yeah, you go into that museum in Clarksdale and you sit and you look through the register there of people who have signed in, and they're from all over the world. It's amazing. Every single day there's somebody who comes in from Sweden or England or
it happened
on a pilgrimage.
That's why Muddy Waters' life was so interesting for me to take on as a subject, because in his lifetime he began in that, you know, in the Delta where he was living an insular life, and by the end of his life, he was on world tours. He was performing in, you know, Sweden and performing in Spain.
Opening for the Rolling Stones.
Opening for the, you know, he was everywhere. And the fact that, and he was known. He traveled these places, and people would be received by people who knew him. And so I got to tell the story not only of Muddy Waters, but also of the evolution of modern blues.
Can you sing the blues if you have money in your pocket?
That's one of my favorite lines in the book.
Yeah.
And it actually, I was sitting there discussing, this is in the introduction, talking about the authenticity of the blues. And Muddy, in 1958 or so in England, had been asked, you know, he now was dressed nice and he had hits already. Hoochie Coochie Man was already a hit, Got My Mojo Working. And so a guy from England says, you know, how do you still sing the blues? And Muddy reached in his pocket and waved a boodle of bills over his head and said, I'm singing the blues now because I have a long memory.
Yeah.
And I think that that's accurate, you know, that the feeling, the pain is the source. And in his lifetime, he, you know, ended up in the Chicago suburbs in a fairly comfortable environment, but he could still play it. And that's my argument with blues today, is that I don't want to know if the person, you know, people say, well, you got to be from the cotton field to sing the blues. And I don't think that's right. I think if you close your eyes and if the sound transports you, if the sound cuts into your soul and takes you to somewhere else, that's good, solid blues. I was talking about it with my wife, and she gave me the line, show me the poverty. You know, the audience today says, show me the poverty about the blues singer. And I think, you know, Bonnie Raitt can transport me.
Just as well as anybody, just as well. Speaking of transporting, he really didn't get it until he got to Chicago, though, because that's when a lot of other things...
Again, the story of Muddy Waters is the story of African-American migration in the 20th century. So though he made these recordings in the South for Alan Lomax, they were destined for the Library of Congress. It wasn't a commercial release. And after a dispute with an overseer who had come to Stovall's farm while the Stovalls were serving in World War II, Muddy realized he wasn't going to be able to stay. It wasn't going to be good for him to stay. It was time to go north. He'd already tried it once to St. Louis. He said, I'm going, baby. And he went up north and began to... He brought the acoustic blues up there. You know, that was all he knew. And his uncle was up there and gave him an electric guitar. And because the sounds outside were not crickets and the wind in the top of the trees as it had been in the Delta, he needed the electric guitar to be heard, and eventually developed the foundation of modern blues and rock and roll.
This is a piece from your documentary that talks about Muddy and making the trip from the Delta on the way up to Chicago. Watch.
Of course, the story goes, when he heard that the white man was looking for him, he thought it was the revenuer, which I'm sure he had every reason to think. But when he found out it wasn't, I think there was something different about Muddy, where Muddy saw this was a way out. This was a ticket, if not to Chicago, to somewhere beyond Stovall's plantation.
Well, I just felt blue. The song veiled into my mind.
It's the first time Muddy ever hears his voice on record. Lomax records him and plays it back. And Muddy hears his voice and says, man, I could sing.
Well, I feel in my, like I feel today. I'm gonna pack my suitcase and make my give. When I'm troubled.
I think Muddy always felt he would get away, but it was some people that probably felt they never would leave Stovall.
And I never be satisfied, and I just can't keep up. Well, that's two trains running. Well, ain't now one hole going my way.
Everybody in Chicago was working then. They were working. They wasn't making much money, but they was working.
Somebody help me with this blues.
I got a job. I was working at a paper factory. containers. I worked there during the days, and I played the weekend at house parties, you know, at different houses. Just me and my guitar. Finally, it began to leak out, you know. But they had a pretty good guy from Mississippi, yeah.
You got ways just like a baby child. Nothing I can do to please her. But oh, yeah, to make this young woman feel satisfied.
What a showman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, being raised in the juke joint environment, he was able to take the power and the feel of a powerful solo blues artist and transform it into a band environment and convey it with that same power.
So you're on this mission. You're out there looking for the stories and looking for the video.
Yeah.
And
I was.
Did they accept you in the Delta when you came down there to ask questions?
Yeah. Well, I'm born and raised in Memphis, so I've been going back and forth to the Delta, you know, all my life.
But you had to find people who knew him. You had to find scraps of paper, bits of stories.
That's really what it was.
Yeah.
It took.
It was a treasure hunt.
I spent some days around Sharkey County and Issaquena County driving. It was hot summer, and I would see someone walking on the side of the road, and I'd pull over, and I would explain what I was doing, and I would end up asking them, "Can you tell me where any old people live?" And because I was looking, you know, Muddy Waters came from a culture that was not recorded and about which records weren't kept. There's not like, I wasn't going to find a box that had his journal in it. He couldn't read or write, and you know there wasn't. So I had to find the old people who had lived it, who could share with me their information. And I knocked on a lot of doors, and sometimes I was received warmly and got great material. And you know, it's in the book right there at the start. Early on, I found a story about Muddy's dad, first-hand account of his dad. So that went right into the book. And sometimes I was, you know, someone comes knocking on your door who you don't know. You got every right to be suspicious. So I, you know,
what about the video? How did you find the video?
The documentary evolved out of the book, sort of as in an organic way. I was because Muddy died in 1983. I began this book in about 1996, and I was trying to get as close to the man as I could. I wanted to feel him in every way I could because it would make the book stronger. And I began to accumulate video footage, and it was really great, as we've seen some. And I began to meet the characters who were telling the stories, and they were really great. And I just said, we got to make a documentary here. I'd made documentaries in the past, and so it took. He was not an easy sell, but it ended up once we got it going, it snowballed, and it's going to air in America on the American Masters series on PBS in February of 2000.
And you're also involved in the Scorsese Blues Project?
And I'm currently working on the Memphis episode of the 7-part series on the blues that Martin Scorsese is the executive producer.
It's pretty much fun, huh?
It's a good job. Sometimes,
not
you know...
bad.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Tell me about standing in his house in Chicago.
Again, you know, trying to get a feel for the man. My goal in writing Can't Be Satisfied was to get beyond the stage and get beyond the recording studio and find out about this man named Muddy Waters. So in Chicago, I met his stepson, whom he'd raised in his longtime home on the South Side. They'd spent, after Hoochie Coochie Man, Muddy bought a house on the South Side. And then he'd moved to the suburbs, and eventually the house had fallen into disrepair. But through Charles, the stepson, who we filmed for the documentary, the first time I met him, Charles took me around the back of the house. It was all boarded up, all the doors and windows. He pulled up a corner of the door, obviously a corner he kept open. Mm-hmm. We scurried under, and like insects, you know, and we got into this abandoned house, and dust was flying in the air, and the kitchen, there was a big hole in the kitchen floor. But there was a real sense, as I stood in the hallway and looked down this long hall with rooms on the left and light coming through and falling onto the wall on the right, and the dust particles there, it seemed as if Muddy had just left. Yeah. The wallpaper in his room was his wallpaper, you know, and I was standing there and I said, okay, Charles, explain it, you know, bed here, nightstand, phonograph, you know, and it just got me. So I feel like the writing in the book got better because I was able to get near to Muddy Waters.
It amazed me that no matter how popular he was, no matter how much money he had, he would still sell a mojo to somebody.
I think that's that Delta upbringing, you know. He was raised in poverty. So I don't think he ever trusted his popularity or his financial success. And just like when he moved into this home on the South Side, he got a 2-story place and converted the upstairs into apartments and rented them out for separate income. He was always after the hustle, and he would carry around in the 60s when mojos were popular and he was playing clubs. He would carry a sack of, you know, little canvas bags with a pea in them, and he'd sell them, you know, to people for $1.
We're going to take another look at a clip from the documentary which describes some of the contradictions between Muddy the man and Muddy the Mississippi blues musician.
It was amazing to me to see somebody who seemed to have it all be unhappy inside for the same reasons that the rest of us are.
The guy was totally unneurotic, self-analytical. He just didn't brood a lot, and yet his music has all those qualities in it.
Sail on, Molly, honeybee, sail on.
It was hard to read Muddy, hard to know what he was thinking. And when he spoke, he had a habit. He used to go like this with his finger when he was thinking, but it was almost like watch his mouth so he doesn't open it and say the wrong thing. He was very regarded to that extent. He told me, if you got something good, keep it in your pocket. Don't tell people.
She's been all around the world making honey. Now she's coming back home to me.
Record companies took advantage of it, didn't they?
Yeah. It's not easy being a blues performer. Mm-hmm. And in the early 70s, when he'd been with Chess Records about 20 years, and it just, things had not proceeded well. Like, this performance is from around that time. He's playing great, but the records were not sounding like they had been. And he got a great comeback in the mid-70s when he finally left Chess Records, hooked up with a new manager, and recorded the Hard Again record in 1977 which was actually my initial introduction to him. I got in there and worked backwards, and sounding powerful, and got to enjoy and got a, proper distribution and good royalties, and got to almost another 10 years of success before he died, opening for Eric Clapton, that kind of thing.
The car wreck almost.
The car wreck, in a way, actually initiated the comeback. He had this terrible wreck, and interestingly, when he was pulled from the car, he asked his friend, "Is my face messed up?" Because he knew that his face was so important in his getting over on stage. So, but I think that time at home, that downtime, made him begin to think it might be time to leave Chess Records, and that, I think, it instigated the comeback.
Wow. Well, this has been a great adventure for you. 5 years in the making, and the documentary on top of that, and now the Scorsese project. And this will be on in February on PBS for people to...
Right, on the American Masters series, and the book is in stores now, called Can't Be Satisfied, Life and Times of Muddy Waters, and I'm very happy with the way it came out.
Great. Great to meet you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. And thank you. I'll see you next time.